June 6, 1944. More than 150,000 Allied troops were preparing to storm the coast of Nazi-occupied France. Hitler knew an invasion was coming. He had thousands of soldiers, tanks, and defenses waiting to stop it. But there was one problem. He was waiting in the wrong place. For months, the Allies had created fake armies, fake radio messages, and an elaborate deception designed to convince Hitler that the real invasion would happen somewhere else, and incredibly, he believed it. So how did the Allies fool Nazi Germany and help make D-Day possible? By 1944, Nazi Germany controlled much of Western Europe. For years, Hitler had known that the Allies would eventually try to cross the English Channel and return to France. So Germany prepared. Thousands of bunkers, artillery positions, mines, and beach obstacles were built along the European coastline, part of a massive defensive system known as the Atlantic Wall. But the Germans faced an impossible question. Where would the invasion come? The French coastline stretched for hundreds of miles, but one location seemed obvious: Pas de Calais. It was the shortest route across the English Channel, and German commanders believed it was the most logical place for the Allies to attack. That assumption would become one of the most important weaknesses in Germany's defenses, because the Allies were planning to land somewhere else: Normandy. But choosing Normandy created a dangerous problem. If Germany discovered the real landing site before the invasion began, thousands of troops could be moved there, and D-Day might fail before it even started. So the Allies decided to hide the truth with one of the most ambitious military deceptions of World War II. It was called Operation Fortitude. The goal was simple: make Germany believe the main invasion would come at Pas de Calais, not Normandy. To make the deception convincing, the Allies created something extraordinary: an army that barely existed. Fake tanks and military vehicles appeared across southeast England. Dummy landing craft were positioned where German reconnaissance might detect them. False radio traffic made it sound as if enormous military units were preparing for battle. And at the center of the deception was one of the most famous Allied commanders of the war, General George S. Patton. The Germans respected Patton and considered him a likely commander of the coming invasion. So when intelligence appeared to place his army opposite Calais, the story seemed to make perfect sense. But while Germany watched the fake army, the real invasion force was quietly preparing for Normandy. Fake tanks and radio messages were convincing, but the Allies had an even more powerful weapon: a spy Germany trusted. His name was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. German intelligence believed Garbo was one of their most valuable agents in Britain. What they didn't know was that he was secretly working for the Allies. Garbo created an entire imaginary network of agents and sent Germany carefully designed reports filled with false information. Again and again, those reports pointed toward the same conclusion: the main Allied invasion would come at Pas de Calais. Even after Allied troops landed in Normandy, Garbo continued the deception. He warned Germany that Normandy might only be a diversion, and that the real attack was still coming at Calais. The deception had become so convincing that German forces remained positioned around Calais, while the battle in Normandy was already underway. And now, the Allies were ready to turn the deception into reality. By the evening of June 5, 1944, the deception was in place. But now came the part no illusion could control: the weather. The English Channel was rough. Strong winds, heavy clouds, and dangerous seas threatened the entire invasion. Thousands of ships were waiting. More than 150,000 Allied troops were preparing to cross into France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower faced an enormous decision: delay the invasion, or send the largest amphibious assault force in history into the storm. His commanders believed there was a small break in the weather. Eisenhower made the decision. D-Day would begin on June 6th. During the night, paratroopers climbed aboard aircraft bound for France. Across southern England, soldiers entered landing craft and transport ships. Then, under the cover of darkness, the invasion fleet began moving across the English Channel. For many of the men aboard those ships, the coastline ahead would be their first sight of occupied Europe. And waiting beyond the darkness were the beaches of Normandy. Before sunrise on June 6, 1944, the invasion was already underway. Thousands of Allied paratroopers descended behind German lines, tasked with securing roads, bridges, and key positions before the beach landings began. Then, as dawn approached, the horizon filled with ships. Allied warships opened fire on German coastal defenses, while thousands of landing craft moved toward 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. At approximately 6:30 in the morning, the first American assault waves began landing on Utah and Omaha. The conditions were chaotic. Rough seas had pushed some landing craft away from their intended positions, while smoke and confusion made navigation difficult. At Omaha Beach, the resistance was especially strong. But across the invasion zone, Allied forces continued moving inland. British and Canadian troops landed farther east at Gold, Juno, and Sword. By the end of the day, the Allies had established footholds along the Normandy coast. The Atlantic Wall had not stopped the invasion. But something remarkable was still happening farther north. Germany was still watching Calais. The deception had survived even after D-Day had begun. By the morning of June 6th, the truth was unfolding on the beaches of Normandy. But German commanders still faced a terrifying question. Was Normandy the real invasion, or only the beginning? For months, Allied deception had convinced them that the main attack would come at Pas de Calais. And even after thousands of Allied troops landed in Normandy, that belief did not disappear. The imaginary First U.S. Army group was still presented as if it were waiting in southeast England. Fake radio traffic continued. Double agents continued sending reports. And Garbo delivered one of the most important messages of the entire deception. He claimed that the Normandy landings were a diversion designed to pull German forces away from Calais before the real invasion began. The warning reinforced exactly what German commanders already feared. Powerful German formations remained in the Pas de Calais region, instead of immediately being committed against the Normandy beachhead. Days passed, then weeks. Yet the expected second invasion never came. By the time Germany fully understood what had happened, the Allies had already established themselves in Normandy. An army that never existed had helped protect an invasion that changed the course of the war. Operation Fortitude did not win D-Day by itself. The invasion succeeded because of an enormous combination of soldiers, sailors, air crews, intelligence officers, resistance networks, logistics, planning, and sacrifice. But deception gave the Allies something incredibly valuable: time. German commanders had prepared for an invasion. They simply could not be certain where the decisive blow would fall. While Allied forces strengthened their position in Normandy, the threat of another invasion near Calais continued to influence German decisions. And the most extraordinary part was that the army Germany feared did not exist. The tanks were decoys. Much of the radio traffic was manufactured. The intelligence reports had been carefully manipulated. And the enormous force supposedly waiting across the channel was largely an illusion. Yet that illusion had helped conceal one of the largest military operations in history. Operation Fortitude proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon on a battlefield isn't a tank, a ship, or an aircraft. Sometimes, it's what you can make your enemy believe. D-Day is remembered for the soldiers who stormed the beaches, the paratroopers who descended into occupied France, and the enormous fleet that crossed the English Channel. But behind that invasion was another battlefield, one fought with information, deception, and doubt. Operation Fortitude created an army that existed largely in the mind of the enemy. Fake tanks, false radio transmissions, double agents, and one carefully constructed lie. The real invasion would come at Calais. Germany prepared for an attack that never came, while the real invasion was already changing the course of the war in Normandy. More than 80 years later, Operation Fortitude remains one of history's most remarkable military deception operations. Because sometimes, winning isn't only about what your enemy can see, it's about what you can make them believe. If you enjoy the hidden stories behind history's greatest events, subscribe to Mystery Atlas and tell us in the comments, could a deception this massive still work today?